So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Professor Jimmy Volmink. Jimmy is at the stage of his life where he is very happy. I've never seen him smiling so much. He is no longer the dean of the medical school at Stellenbosch University, the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Health and Medical Sciences at University of Stellenbosch. So, which is why he's smiling. He doesn't have to attend any more meetings. He doesn't have to chair any more meetings. I think Jimmy has it's been wonderful to many of us who are growing up in medical sciences here in the Cape and across the country. He has spent quite a bit of time prior to coming back to South Africa in the UK and also in North America. When he came to Stellenbosch University, I think he was really perturbed that so many people on this continent do amazing work, but they work by themselves in silos. And I think his first stint as the deputy dean of research was really to try and break those silos and get people to collaborate. And he established fantastic centers of collaboration, in particular in infectious diseases. And he made Stellenbosch University a very attractive place to work in. He also spent quite a bit of time, I think in the second term, trying to more vigorously transform the university in different ways, from the building, from the people, from the names of the places. And those in South Africa who know Stellenbosch University does not have a very good history. They don't necessarily come from the right side of apartheid. But Jimmy spends a lot of time looking at evidence-based medicine, and his passion is really about the science. And whenever we ask to speak to him, he's always listens to us and says, yeah, it's a nice project, Bona, but let's talk a little bit about the methodology. Are you sure that what you are asking, the questions you're asking will be answered by the kind of work that you do, that you want him to do? So he's very particular about making sure that we understand the methodology. He's won numerous awards from Canada, from South Africa, and we are really honored this morning, Jimmy, to have you speak a little bit about, hopefully, about your legacy. Hopefully we'll share some stories about what life was like being a dean of medical school in South Africa. We're looking forward to having you speak to us today. Professor Jimmy.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Bonga, for your introduction, your kind words. It's truly an honor for me to be here to talk to you this morning. I've been to one of these meetings before and provided a short input, but to be invited to deliver a keynote is truly an honor, and I want to thank the organizers for that. I have come to know a number of you over the years and learned to not only know you but also respect you. And I'm also aware of the many initiatives that you've been driving to promote equity in the health sciences, in psychiatry, mental health, but also more broadly. And so I want to thank you for that, because I really do think it will take all of us to bring about the kinds of changes that we are hoping for in this world. So let me see if I can manage to work this. Okay, that didn't work very well. Let me just check, get some consultation here. Which one is it? It's not doing it. This one. Right. All right, thank you. So when I do these talks on capacity development, I routinely now show this slide. I think many of you know knew Professor Bongani. He was certainly a very good friend of mine and also a valued colleague. And I know that many of you were very close to him too. I want to acknowledge him here because I really do think that he was a truly great man. And I think that he was one of the finest leaders in academia that we have seen during our lifetime. There are many things that I respected about him. And we spent many hours chatting, sitting down, talking. We were co-conspirators, if you like, and we talked about a lot of stuff. But the one thing the couple of things that stood out for me. One was his commitment to excellence. When Bongani did something, you knew that he was going to do it in the best way that you could possibly do it. Yeah, that was what he aimed for. The second thing, it was his passion for developing the next generation of scientists in Africa. He was really, really committed to that, and he worked tirelessly towards that, to achieving that goal. And then I think the third thing is that I admired about him was his relentless optimism. Nothing could shake him from a belief that something that he engages in will work. People that he chose to collaborate with, and there are many, many across Africa and beyond, really believed in them, really believed in the value of doing things together. So I do think that it is extremely sad that he has left us too soon. But I want to say that his legacy lives on. After his passing, some of us wrote about him, and we pointed out that perhaps one of Bongani's most remarkable legacies is his dedication to mentoring junior clinician scientists and building research capacity in Africa. He really truly taught us the importance of lifting as we rise. You don't wait until a professor or a head of department or a dean or whatever it is. You do that from day one. As you learn, you pass on that knowledge to others and you bring others up with you from the beginning. And I think that was for me a very important insight that I got from working and being friends from going university. So what I'm going to do now, my topic is about equity-focused leadership, and I'm just going to give it all in one slide, right? So this is it. There's nothing more to say, okay? I think to be an equity-based leader, or equity-focused leader, there are, I think, at least 5 things that you have to keep in mind. One is that I think you need to understand the origins of inequity, and you need to be prepared to promote an equity-focused mindset in your leadership. Now that, is something that one can speak about for a long time, but it essentially comes down to understanding how power and privilege works. It is understanding also how one manages to promote equity in a situation of power, imbalances of power, and very often with that goes a hostility to change. So that really, I think, is the first 2 things. The third thing is about building a transformative institutional culture. There is a saying that I like, which is, leaders are like farmers. Farmers don't make the crops grow. They prepare the ground in which the crops grow. And if the ground is hostile to growth, nothing's going to grow, right? So that is really what leadership is about. So for me, that is the culture in which people are embedded. And very often in our institutions, we find ourselves in cultures that are characterized by patriarchy, by authoritarianism, by sexism, by racism, and all the other isms. And that is not conducive to growth, especially for young people and often certain groups of people within that environment. And so it is a case of having to move from that culture into a different culture. A culture where people feel welcome, people feel safe, people feel valued, where people feel cared for and empowered to perform at their best. That is the culture shift that is required. Without that, you're not going to make much progress, and you're certainly not going to make it very fast. That brings us to the fourth item there, which is we need to implement systems and structures that intentionally support equity. Now that is easier said than done. We all are resistant to change of whatever nature. But when you're operating in an environment where certain people are privileged more than others, then those people will resist change with all that they've got. Sometimes they will do it subtly, and sometimes they will do it more overtly. But they will resist, you can be sure of that. And then finally, there is the evaluation and improvement. And Bonga referred to my emphasis on looking at what actually works. Because I've realized that sometimes we have a problem and we come up with an intervention to deal with that problem, and theoretically that intervention should work. But that is not the same as, does it work? Does it actually work? So one has to evaluate, and one needs to see what works better than others and improve what we do. So that is it, folks. That is all I have to say. Now, if you choose to fall asleep, then that's fine. You'll still know what the talk was about. The rest of the talk, I'm warning you up front, is really just about storytelling. It's really about telling the story of my journey as a dean in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences primarily. I did have, this is my 17th year at Stellenbosch. The first 5 years, I was Vice Dean for Research. I'm not going to focus so much on that because that will make the story too long. I'm going to focus on my 11 years as Dean, and now I'm free, and I am a professor in the Department of Global Health, and don't have to worry too much about what's happening in the rest of the university. All right, so let me then proceed. So I think from where we come from, and where we are, we need to acknowledge that there was something called colonialism. Colonialism is essentially, as you know, the exploitation and subjugation of people in colonized countries, largely by European imperial powers. They did that for over 400 years, and they did it in Africa, in Asia, in America, and so forth. But what I want to highlight here is that book called The Scramble for Africa, because that book focuses on the intensification of colonialism in Africa, roughly from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. There was a period of time when about 8 European countries, I think it was, basically got together and decided that they were going to invade Africa. They were going to carve up Africa. They were going to essentially colonize, invade, exploit Africa. And the results have been disastrous. Not only was there economic exploitation, so with extractive exploitation, but the effect on the psyche of African people, I think, was disastrous. We were told that nothing we do is good, that all the wisdom comes from Europe, that the way we worshipped, the way we educated, the way cultures, everything was inferior. And so that left us all a little bit, affected psychologically. And I think it led to a lot of, it still today leads to a lot of people having self-doubt about their own capabilities, about the value of being African. And in some cases, it even leads to self-hate. And I think that is the sadness of it all. Now, no sphere of our life was untouched by colonialism. Let me be clear on that. And health in particular was affected. So there is these two books. The one is The Maladies of Empire, which I would recommend to you. And the other is a report which has recently been released, I think it was last month or the month before, about the relationship between the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and colonialism. And some of the findings of that report are quite stunning. So, for example, it shows how the London School directly benefited from colonialism. The school received most of its funding from Britain's colonies, particularly those in Africa, and its medical research only benefited white people, essentially. Secondly, and this is I've just chosen a few from a long list of findings, the development of tropical medicine at the school, and they still retain the name, note, was shaped by white supremacy and racist pseudoscience, such as eugenics. Thirdly, senior staff, it was found, openly practiced racial discrimination. And lastly, unethical research was conducted in the colonies. All of those things are well described in this report, and I would recommend that you read it at your leisure. And so, when we work in healthcare, we need to reflect on the extent to which colonialism has impacted the way we think about health, about how to deliver health, about which interventions are important and which are not, etc. So that's colonialism. Now remember, I'm talking now in the context of understanding where inequity comes from. Of particular relevance to South Africa is apartheid. So let me just be clear, apartheid didn't only affect South Africa, it affected the whole of Africa. It impacted on many other African countries as well, in particular South Africa. Hendrik Verwoerd was an apartheid-era prime minister, and in fact is widely known as the architect of apartheid. Apartheid, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but suffice to say it was a brutal system of racial segregation and oppression, which denied people many of the basic human rights. Now, let me tell you about apartheid using the words of Hendrik Verwoerd himself. Here is one. Blacks should never be shown the greener pastures of education. They should know that their station in life is to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. He goes on. If someone has to be unemployed, a white man or a native, it is best in the current circumstances and with the existing differences in living standards, more economical for the nation, that the native should be unemployed. And so when you look at inequalities in South Africa today, it all goes back really to the systemic discrimination that took place. And so it's no coincidence that when you look at our institutions in South Africa, you see the skewed demographic, shall we say. you will see that there are very few people of color in those institutions. And that's not a chance happening. Let me share with you a very personal story about my own background. The picture on the left there is my mother and father, James and Johanna Volmink. All they knew was the effects of British colonialism and then apartheid. They knew nothing else in their entire lifetime. That's when they grew up, that's what they had. And neither of them completed high school. My father was a laborer in the city council. He worked for 40 years as a laborer, going to work on his bicycle every day. He worked in shifts. I remember as a kid looking at him going in winter rains, 10 o'clock at night for his shift that starts at 12 o'clock. And he did that consistently for 40 years, without any possibility of any promotion, because that was what apartheid dictated. My mother also did not finish high school. She made tea. She was a tea girl, and she did that for many years. I didn't know anybody in my family, or in my community for that matter, that ever went to university. It was just not on the radar, right? But that changed when my brother was in his final year at high school. On the right you have my brother John, myself, the junior there, and then our sister. I always laugh when I look at that picture because I've got a little tissue in my hand. And I remember that as a kid I was fascinated with insects. And so whenever I saw insects, I would then take it home with me to protect it. But invariably I would kill it by the time Yeah. Anyway, so John was on a school outing, or they were taken around to some place in school, and he was chosen to make a little speech after lunch. That particular day, there was in the audience there was the mayor of Cape Town, and John made his speech. And after the speech, the mayor came up to him and said, "What are you doing next year?" And he said, "Well, sir, I'm going to try and find a job." That was what was the norm, right? You go and find out to care for the rest of your family. And the mayor said to him, "Have you thought of going to university?" He had not. None of us had. Long story short, John ended up going to UWC, which was the so-called Bush College, where people of color went. He did a BSc majoring in mathematics and physics. He continued studying after that. He ended up eventually at Cornell University in the US doing a PhD in mathematics. He became a faculty member at Cornell. He then came back to South Africa, and he held high-level jobs at UCT as well as UKZN. He's currently just stepped down as the chair of Umalusi, as some of you might know. And he also worked at grassroots level to promote mathematical education for many years. But the fact that we finally had someone that actually went to university changed our perspective completely. All of us then started aspiring to go to university and be educated. My mother, the tea girl, took our little reports from school, and as she was serving tea to the bosses, she would slip out, she would take out the report and show them how well her children were doing. And some of us got bursaries from the company that she worked for because of that. And that's why I stand here today, because that's what she did. They were just amazing parents. They were committed. They weren't uneducated because, or formal education I should say, because of a lack of talent. It was purely a lack of opportunity. And so it is with many people in South Africa today. The next two pictures show my siblings. Out of the 6, 5 of us have obtained postgraduate degrees, some in law, in economics, in mathematics, and in medicine. And on the right is my brother John and myself. And this I want to just say because I want to connect it back to Verwoerd. John recently received an honorary doctorate in education from Stellenbosch University, and I became the first black dean of Stellenbosch University. Well, why that? Why that is important, friends, is because Verwoerd, the Prime Minister that I spoke to about earlier, he was a professor at Stellenbosch University. In fact, he was a professor of psychology at Stellenbosch University. And I think he's turning in his grave today. Right, moving on. Now, I wish I could say that the success that we enjoyed in our family in terms of breaking free from the bonds of oppression and lack of education was something that could easily be translated to the rest of society. But it's not that simple. The Time magazine recently had an article showing South Africa being the most unequal country in the world. The picture there on the left shows the difference in the way people live. On the right is a sort of blown up version of that. That community is 10 minutes drive from where I live today. And for the last 5 years, I've been taking students from Stellenbosch into that community to try and do work with the young people, do tuition there, etc. I understand the challenges of people living in a shack are enormous. Lack of electricity, lack of running water, lack of transport. How do you make progress in these circumstances? And so Trevor Noah is right when he says, we tell people to follow their dreams, but you can only dream of what you can imagine. And depending on where you come from, your imagination can be quite limited. Right? And so we have a lot of work to do. And I am so angry sometimes that 27 years after democracy in South Africa, people are still living like that. We have not prioritized those people. And that is not good. And so the work of equity, and I think this picture is now quite familiar to probably many of you, is shown there. You cannot treat everybody as if, we're all the same, and treat everybody equally, and think that we're going to have equal outcomes. You have to treat people who have less. You have to treat them more. You have to give them more in order to achieve equity of outcomes. It should be absolutely clear. And we should do it until we get to a situation on the right there, which is the ideal, where we have social justice, where everybody has an equal chance of success. And now I come into a few remarks about my period as dean. So in I step as the first dean of colour, as I've said, and it's very lonely. I often found myself being the only person of colour in the room, and I came with the vision of making a difference, that using this position to really make a difference, not only in the institution, but in the country. I think that was important. But as I said, people who enjoy privilege generally, and all of us sometimes are in that position, so this is not pointing a finger at anybody in particular. We resist change because we enjoy the privilege. Right? So let me give you 3 examples of the kinds of things that happened to me when I started. So a professor comes up to me fairly early, like the first 2 weeks of being appointed, and he says, I supported your appointment, but I know you won't stay here very long. not a nice thing, you know, to hear. But you actually want to hear them saying, you know, I hope you stay forever. So that was the first thing. The second, an emeritus professor who was the head of one of the departments came to me at my induction dinner when they welcomed me as dean. And after the dinner, she came up to me and she says, you know, I want you to understand, we worked very hard to get, now I didn't say to her, who's we? But anyway, we worked very hard to get this faculty to where it is today. Please don't mess things up. Right? And the third was even a bigger gut punch. So this is, so imagine this. So I'm chairing my first meeting of heads of department. And I'm sitting, and you know, all the heads of department are there, all right. And in walks the last head of department, who was 5 minutes late, sits down, and just before he sits down, he looks at me, he looks at these colleagues, and he says, oh, I see affirmative action has reached the top. And that really hit me in the gut because, you know, I thought about how my parents sacrificed, the hard work I put into it, the fact that I studied at some of the best universities in the world, and still that was not good enough to appoint me in my own right as just me. I was appointed in his eyes because of the color of my skin. And that is so wrong. And I can tell you many more horror stories, but that would suffice for now. In fact, these microaggressions got worse. In fact, they blew up into full-blown hostility when this same professor who made this last comment actually led a campaign against me under the pretext that I was trying to change the language of instruction at the faculty. I was in the Afrikaans newspapers for about 3 weeks on the front page. The FW, the Clark Foundation, commented about me on their website, saying two things. One, that I was a lackey of the ANC, and secondly, that I was contemplating Boer genocide. That's how bad it really got. And so the question for me at the time was, wow, did I just step on a landmine? Am I doing the right thing in being here? Is it going to be fight or flight? And that really was going on my head. And then, I thought about it, talked to a lot of people, and one of the quotes that I found quite useful was this one. It was a Chinese proverb that says, better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. You can be in a situation and just see the negative side, just complain about it, just fight it. Or you can say, can we lift this thing to a higher level? And that's what I've tried to do. And I got my inspiration from a number of these good people. People who have all had experience of leading in situations of hostility. And I think that was important for me. And the two things that I want to just highlight, there were many other things, but two things. Well, two of these quotes sort of captured it for me. Leadership is not about position, authority, or hierarchy. It is about choice. It is about the decision to make a meaningful difference in the world and in the lives of others. So that's what leadership is about. It's not about me. It's not about saying, I need to fight for my right. It's saying, how can I be used as a channel to improve the plight of others around me? Secondly, I like this quote by John Quincy Adams. It says, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And I like that because, it tells me that at the core of leadership is your ability to inspire others to be their better selves. The question then became, how? How do you do that? And that was not, an easy question to answer. I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of reflection. I did a lot of talking to people, and in the end I realized that I wanted to be a leader rather than just a manager. A manager is about making things run efficiently. A leader is working for change and transformation. And so I wrote out this in my private notes. I wrote out this statement for myself. A leader's job is to articulate a compelling vision for an organization, to design and drive strategies to achieve that vision, and to inspire others to participate in co-creating the desired outcome. That was what was going to drive me, and that was going to be important to me. It was several years later, literally 5 years ago, that I eventually ended up at some business school, and I did a course in advanced leadership and management, and I discovered that other people have actually thought of this, and have put it much more eloquent, or elegantly. They put together this diagram, which I won't speak to in great detail, but essentially the white bit in the middle is leading. And leading really, you require 3 domains of activity to be an effective leader. One is in the strategic area, where you look at the future, that's your vision, etc. 2 is the operational domain, and that is about delivering results. So you must make sure the processes and the structures are in place to be able to do that. And then the 3rd is focusing on relationships. Okay? And of the 3, the one that's most often neglected is the last one. Okay? And a relationship is really what makes everything flow, because that really is it helps to build the team, it creates alignment with the vision, etc., etc., and builds trust and everything. So relationship building is very important. And so I set about writing out a vision for the faculty. And I said we wanted to optimize health and equality in South Africa and beyond. And my colleagues looked at me and said, "This is a university, what are you talking about?" And I said, well, I don't believe that you can separate academia from society. I believe that we are here to serve society. And so this university, I said to them, was instrumental in engineering a policy that negatively impacted on the majority of people in this country. We need to be at the forefront of making a change and making it better. We set out various values that would drive our decisions and actions. Values of inclusivity, compassion, respect, accountability, equity, and excellence. Those are the values. We workshopped this, we got a lot of people involved in discussing it, and we finally settled on these values that we... And so that became the driver of everything that we did in the faculty. And I was pleased recently, just in the last couple of years, that the university also adopted very similar values. They put it in a nice diagram here. But those values directly came from the work that we were doing in the faculty. Now here's the thing. The vision is the starting point. But it should be very clear, I think, to all of us, that a vision is not self-executing. A vision is something that has to be driven, and you need to have mechanisms in place to realize, achieve that vision. And I don't have time to speak in detail about everything, but here are some of the things that we put into place. So we had a Dean's Advisory Committee on Transformation, because I believe that I didn't know everything. I really needed to learn from a cross-section of people. Only 2 of these, there was a committee of about 15 people, only 2 of them were heads of departments. The others were from a cross-section of the staff and some students in the faculty who were advising. We met regularly, and many things were discussed, and ideas were brought forward that we could implement. So, for example, we ended up having a faculty charter that we workshopped with the entire faculty. We put that on the wall, where we translate the values of the faculty into our business. So education, teaching, research, clinical work, community activities. This is what it might look like if we had these values implanted in what we do. We had the preamble to the South African Constitution put on the wall, where we reminded everybody that South Africa belongs to all that live in it. We attended to financial needs, so we created an Itemba bursary fund. We also, I took a portion of the budget of the faculty and I put it into a separate fund called the Diversity Fund, which was targeted at employing people from people from previously disadvantaged communities, and in order to promote diversity, etc. We looked at our student admission criteria, recruitment practices. We had a new, never had it before, an undergraduate student commitment, where in the first week that students arrive, we give them a statement, and we ask them to tell them what our values are, and ask them to make a commitment that throughout their period of study, that they would respect these values. We created many opportunities for courageous conversations. People need to talk. There is a school of thought that says, we should forget the past and we should just move on. Well, actually, some of us do have a need to understand what actually happened, and to talk about and to have others acknowledge what actually happened in order that we might move on. We also had fun. We created a faculty gala concert where we said we're going to bring people together and celebrate our diversity of talents and people and cultures. And every year we used to have this fantastic concert. And then we attended to some critical support services. So we had a manager of student affairs. Many of our students who have come into the faculty as we've transformed our students who come from underprivileged or social disadvantaged backgrounds, they have all sorts of social and financial issues that they deal with. So we created a position where there was somebody that could engage with them, look at financial, social needs, look at conflict among students, etc. And we had a relational coach. We found that many of the staff, the faculty, they wanted to talk about certain things, but they didn't even have the language to talk about things that were difficult. And so this coach would then be asked to meet with them either individually or as a group in order to help them have those conversations. And in research, there were a number of things that, I already put some of them in place as Vice Dean of Research, and we developed this further, and I won't go into them all, but really just looking at systems and structures that could support people who wanted to do research and to promote, to extend their activities in academia beyond clinical or beyond teaching. We put a lot of energy into building skills. So we created a new program called the MSc in Clinical Epidemiology. Some of the people sitting in this room are products of that particular program. But since 2010, 160 students have graduated, and they come from 20 different countries in Africa. And they've gone on to doing great things in their various institutions, either in South Africa or elsewhere in Africa. They've also published, as a result of the skills that they've acquired. Biostatistics was an enormous issue that we needed to give attention to. There were almost no biostatisticians to help with research in our region, and so we created an MSc in Biostatistics, starting with a D71 planning grant from Poverty in 2014, pulling together people from different countries in sub-Saharan Africa to help us think about how we build capacity in biostatistics. And finally, we've got this MSc in biostatistics. It's now had, in the last 3 years or so, 23 graduates from 8 different African countries. So all of that was really important. But we also, you know, we're a university, and we needed to ensure that we look at other things. We could not just look at issues of equity. We also, you know, there was a bigger picture. And, you know, it's also a kind of keeping a balance, you know, keeping an eye on everything at the same time. And so we did a lot of fundraising. We built, you know, modern infrastructure and facilities. The biomedical research institute over there was built at the cost of 1.2 billion rand, and it's just being completed right now. And we also attended to the needs for state-of-the-art technology, equipment. And so all of those things were important. So we've talked about the culture, we've talked about the skills development, and we've talked about the infrastructure and equipment. There's one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that is mentorship. So mentorship truly, I think, is the secret sauce that makes things work. And we are fortunate to have good people in our faculty that could provide mentorship to different people. But I also acknowledge in the room here all the mentors sitting here, and you know, just want to say to you how important that really is, because it really is ultimately the thing that makes the biggest difference. If you have somebody that you can trust, that you can work with, that believes in you, you can go very far. Okay, and I speak from personal experience. So what do mentors do? So I've listed 7 things. They act as a sounding board. They provide honest feedback. They guide and advise. They challenge and stimulate. They act as promoters and advocates. They motivate and encourage. And very importantly, they inspire. And I think that's key. And I say that's key because, you know, I really think that looking at someone, ideally that looks like you, not necessarily, but ideally that looks like you, who has made it, and you can look up to that person and say, wow, I want to be like that person. That is really, really important. This is a quote. This is a quote that I want to leave with you. It says, mentors are people who can see more in you than you can see in yourself. Effective mentors are so unshakably convinced that we have greatness in us, and their vision of what is possible is so clear and powerful that they wind up convincing us too. Save it up.
Yeah.
Oops, wrong way. Okay, in my closing moments, let me just mention that the work was not only concentrated in Stellenbosch, we also worked outside of Stellenbosch because we really wanted to serve the nation, we wanted to serve the continent in many ways. And so here's Bongani, who is the chair of this commission, the report here, the Academy of Science of South Africa. I was a member of that committee. We came up with a number of recommendations for how clinical research can be strengthened, one of which was the National Health Scholars Program. We said we wanted 1,000 PhDs funded in 10 years. A little bit behind on schedule, but I've just obtained the data from the MRC, and so far 147 students have been awarded this scholarship for PhD and somewhat less for masters. These are some of the activities, and these interventions are obviously benefiting people from around the country. And then we also have here some people you may recognize, one of which is the infant whisperer. And the Netcare Scholarship, first called the Hamilton Naki Netcare Clinical Scholars, and since Bongani's passing, has been called the Bongani Mayosi Netcare Clinical Scholars. And I just want to show you at the end here, for sake of time, so far since 2007, 21 scholarships have been awarded, 12 candidates have completed, and so far of those 12, 9 have been appointed as in professorial positions or as heads of department, and 1 has become the MRC's vice president for research. Okay. And we're very proud of that, and we realize that this was one intervention that did it, and Bonga has mentioned others that have contributed to the advancement. I want to briefly also mention the work that I've been involved with for 20 years in Cochrane, and how we've developed capacity there for people from many different African countries who have come here, who have learned research synthesis, who have learned about developing evidence-based clinical guidelines, and who are making a contribution in their countries, but also at the international level, often at the World Health Organization. So what have we achieved in the faculty? And I say this for the sake of the professor that told me that I should not mess things up. This is after 10 years. We have made great strides in terms of diversity. I don't have time to tell you about these stories, but they're wonderful stories. These 2 young men come from Khayelitsha, which is where I showed you the picture. They've gone right through the system with bursaries and with support in the faculty, and both of them are now they're specializing in internal medicine. This group at the end was at Christmas time. You can see the Christmas tree at our house. Some of the most disadvantaged students who had just finished their medical training, and one of them became the top medical student in the class. So that's what you see. And you know, if you put a little bit of an effort to give people opportunity. Sorry, I just wanted to also point out that quote. I like that quote. Diversity is being invited to the party. It's only the beginning, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And it's the inclusion that gives you a sense of belonging, and it helps you to flourish in the environment. Just very quickly, these are up and coming new leaders in the faculty where I work. These are the people that are taking over. The demographics are looking very much different from when I first arrived, and I'm very proud of these folks who are doing great things, and there's more, some of which you have seen before. And then in terms of research output, very quickly, I'll just show you the trends, very quickly. The trends in research, the trends in PhD enrollments, the trends in PhD graduates over 10 years, the postdocs, and the research income, all have increased exponentially really in the last while. So you don't have to choose between diversity and excellence. You can have both, right? And then finally, I just want to connect this comment about education by Nelson Mandela to the one that you heard from Verwoerd, where both of them understood the power of education. The one was, if you denied people education, you keep them at bay, right? And Nelson Mandela says education can be used as a weapon, and it can be used to change things, not only in yourself, but also for the world. And I like this guy, Brian Stevenson. Some of you may know him, really admire his work. He says there are 4 things that you need to do to make a difference in this world. Number 1, get close to the problem. You can't change things from a distance, right? 2, change the narrative. Okay? You can have a victim narrative, or you can have a victor's narrative. Which one are you going to choose? Stay hopeful, and be willing to do uncomfortable things. And boy, did we do some uncomfortable things. But that's important. And then finally, no one can do it alone. I like this quote, no one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it. Thank you.
so much. Fantastic. Unfortunately, we don't run out of time for Q&A, but maybe just one question for me is, when are you writing the book? You want the book?
Yeah, I am actually working on a book at the moment, but it's about global health equity, more health equity specifically. I will get to this eventually, hopefully.
Please do. Thank you so much. I remember, Jimmy, during the Fees Must Fall period, when students were making all the deans sit down on the floor and talk about issues of equity and transformation, and I'm really grateful that he's come today to show us this journey and to show that how much he's done in the 10 years that he was dean. So thank you so much, Jimmy. We really appreciate it.